This happened when I was 14. I grew up in Pennsylvania where there's not much to do, so we'd always find ourselves hanging out at this old playground by the woods. It wasn't a well-kept park or anything, just a small spot with rusty swings and a broken-down slide. You could tell no one cared about it anymore. One night, my friends and I decided to meet there to just mess around. It was me, my friend Shane, and Dre, who had moved into town not too long ago. We were all bored when Shane suggested we explore the woods behind the park. We'd been in there before during the day, but it was already getting dark, and it felt like a dumb idea to me. But Shane loved pushing limits, so of course Dre was down, and I didn't want to be the only one saying no. We walked into the woods, messing around and using our tiny-ass flashlights to navigate. The trees were thick, and the path we used during the day was barely visible in the dark. After about 15 minutes of walking, we got to a clearing where there was an old, abandoned shed. I had no idea who it belonged to or why it was there, but the place looked like it had been empty for years. It was covered in graffiti, and the windows were busted out. It gave off this super creepy feeling. Shane dared Dre to go inside the shed by himself. I was about to say we should just head back, but Dre said, "Fine, I'll do it. Give me a minute." So Dre went in, and Shane and I waited outside, laughing quietly, expecting him to come running out in a couple of seconds, freaked out by something stupid like a rat or spider. But a minute passed, then 2, then 5, and we still didn't hear anything from Dre. We started calling his name, thinking he was trying to mess with us, but he didn't answer. Ryan, who had been all cocky a minute ago, started looking freaked out too. I remember the exact moment when it hit me that something was seriously wrong. It was dead silent. Not even the usual sounds of crickets or wind through the trees, just nothing. We both stared at the shed, expecting Dre to burst out laughing, but nothing happened. After like 10 minutes of calling his name and getting no response, I told Ryan we needed to go in and find him. We walked toward the shed, and the door creaked as we pushed it open. Inside, it was pitch black, and it smelled awful, like something rotting. We shined our phone flashlights around, but the place was empty. Now I was starting to panic. There was no way he could have just vanished. The only way out of the shed was through the door we came in, and we hadn't seen or heard him leave. We spent the next 20 minutes walking around the woods, calling for Dre, thinking maybe he was pulling some kind of prank and hiding. But there was no sign of him. Ryan looked like he was about to lose it, and honestly, I was too. Eventually, we decided to head back to the park and figure out what to do. When we got back to the park, Dre was just there, sitting on one of the swings, acting like nothing happened. Ryan and I froze, staring at him, completely confused. We ran up to him, asking to know where he'd been, but he just shrugged and said he didn't go anywhere. He claimed he never even went inside the shed and had just decided to come back to the park while we were messing around. We both knew he was lying. We'd seen him go in. We waited for him. We didn't talk about it after that, but it still bugs me to this day. Dre had this weird look in his eyes like he knew something we didn't, but refused to tell us. I still have no idea what happened that night, but I haven't gone back to that shed since. I was about 10 when this happened, and it's something I still think about to this day. School was out, and my routine back then was simple. Wake up, eat cereal, ride my bike around the block, until my mom called me in for dinner. This one afternoon, I decided to take my bike out a little later than usual, right before sunset. The streets were empty, like most people had already gone inside to settle down for the evening. As I was riding past the park, I noticed a car coming up behind me. Nothing unusual about that, cars were always driving through, but this one was slow. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it was an old red sedan, nothing fancy, just kind of old looking. It wasn't tailgating or anything, but it was moving at this weird, almost creeping pace. I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just lost or looking for an address. I kept riding and they passed me, but not far. They just went a little further ahead, then turned down the next street. I figured that was the end of it, but as I turned the corner to loop back home, I saw it again, the same red car. This time it was parked on the side of the road, but as soon as I rode past, it pulled out behind me. Now, I'm starting to feel uneasy. Something about this was off. I sped up a bit, pretending like I hadn't noticed them, trying to ignore the feeling that I was being watched. I took another turn, heading towards the next block, and sure enough, the car followed. Not too close, but close enough. I started thinking, am I overreacting? But the more I tried to ignore it, the more I could feel that creeping tension building in my chest. By now, it was getting darker, and the streetlights were just starting to flicker on. My house was still a few blocks away, and I was trying to play it cool, but my legs were shaking as I pedaled faster. I took a sharp turn down a side street, trying to lose them. For a second, I thought I was in the clear, but then I saw the headlights again. This time, they were moving faster, like they knew I was trying to get away. I don't know what kicked in at that moment, but I ditched the idea of riding casually and just bolted. Finally, I saw my street up ahead. I didn't even check if the car was still following me. I just pedaled as fast as I could straight for my driveway. When I got home, I jumped off my bike and sprinted inside, slamming the door behind me. My mom was in the kitchen making dinner, completely unaware of the panic going on in my head. I peeked out the window, trying to see if the red car had followed me all the way home, but it was gone. Just like that. No sign of it. I tried to explain to my mom what had happened, but of course it sounded ridiculous. Maybe they were just lost, she said, brushing it off. And maybe she was right. Maybe it was nothing. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't. I didn't see the red car again after that. I stopped riding my bike alone in the evenings and stuck to the streets where I knew people would be around. It could have been some harmless misunderstanding, but I don't think I'll ever really know. All I know is it was enough to make me realize how quickly something can go from feeling safe to not. So, here's something I don't talk about much because, well, I'm not even sure how to explain it. I was 12 during this time, and it's something that's stuck with me all these years. Not in a dramatic, this changed my life way, but in a, I can't believe that really happened way. I grew up in Ohio. Every kid group had our little spots we'd hang out after school. For my group, it was this abandoned lot a few blocks from our school, bordered by some dense woods. Technically, it was a construction site that never got finished. A few half-built houses and lots of concrete slabs sticking out of the ground. Most of the kids didn't go near it, but it was our spot. The weird thing is, no one ever talked about what was beyond the lot. Like, the woods were right there, but we never really thought about going in. It wasn't forbidden or anything, just unspoken. Maybe it was because there was always a bad story around that place. Something that made you feel like you didn't want to stick around after dark. Anyway, it was a regular afternoon, and me, Rob, and Danny were just messing around like we always did, skipping rocks or seeing who could jump the farthest across the cracked concrete. I remember it so clearly because that's the day we first noticed him. There was this kid just sitting at the edge of the woods. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, watching us. We thought maybe he was from the school down the road, but none of us recognized him. And in a town as small as ours, you know everyone, especially the other kids. This boy was maybe our age, but he gave a weird-ass vibe, like he didn't belong there. We tried waving at him, thinking maybe he was just shy or something, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, staring. We didn't think much of it that day. We finished up and headed home when the sun started to set. But the next day, he was there again. Same spot. Just watching. We started joking about it, calling him the Watcher, because that's all he did. Just sat there in the same spot, same blank expression, never coming closer. Now, this is where things get weird. A few days later, Rob dared me to go talk to him. I said no, but you know how it is when you're 12 and your friends start daring you to do stuff. You can't back down. So I walked over to the kid, maybe 10 feet away, and as I got closer, I noticed something off. His clothes looked old, like from a different time. Not ancient or anything, but like outdated in a way you can't put your finger on. I said something like, "Hey, what's your name?" or something like that. But he didn't answer. He didn't even blink. His eyes just stayed locked on me, and the longer I stood there, the more uncomfortable I felt. Like there was this pressure building, making me feel like I should back off. But being stubborn, I didn't want to look like a coward in front of my friends. So I tried again, a little louder this time. And then he finally moved. Slowly, he raised his hand and pointed toward the woods behind him. just a slow, deliberate point, like he was trying to show me something. I turned to look, but all I saw were trees, nothing unusual. I looked back at him, but he didn't say anything, just kept pointing. At that point, I was freaked out enough to back off. I shrugged it off and ran back to Rob and Danny. The whole thing left me feeling uneasy. For the next few days, we avoided the lot. But the weird thing is, none of us could shake the feeling that the boy was still there. Every time we passed the edge of the woods, we expected to see him sitting there, watching. But he was gone. Fast forward a few weeks later, we'd almost forgotten about the kid, until I overheard my mom talking to one of the neighbors. She mentioned something about an old rumor that had been going around town when she was younger. She said that back in the 70s, there was a boy who went missing near those woods. The story was vague, something about him wandering off during a family picnic and never coming back. They searched the area for days, but no one ever found him. That's when it clicked. I don't know if the kid we saw was that boy or if it was just some weird coincidence. But after that conversation, none of us ever went back to the lot. It wasn't fear exactly, just this gut feeling that whatever was there didn't want to be disturbed. We never talked about it again, and life went on. But every now and then I catch myself wondering about that kid, who he was, why he was watching us, and what he wanted to show me in those woods. To this day, I still drive past that lot when I visit home. It's overgrown now, just trees and weeds. I think I was 9 or 10 when this went down. We just moved into this split-level house. It wasn't old or creepy, just one of those regular 90s houses with 3 bedrooms, a yard, and a basement that was technically unfinished. But my parents used it as storage. The house itself didn't have any weird quirks, and I never thought much of the basement until one day. Now, let me set the scene. Our basement door was right off the kitchen. It was a hollow, thin door that seemed a little loose on its hinges. My mom would sometimes prop it open with the doorstop when she was carrying laundry up, but otherwise, we kept it closed. Mainly because the basement was damp, cold. One afternoon, I was home alone for a bit after school. My mom had to run errands, and I remember feeling all grown up having the house to myself. I was in the living room watching TV when I heard a soft creak. You know that sound a door makes when it's slowly pushed open? I muted the TV and turned to look towards the kitchen, and sure enough, the basement door was open, just slightly. I didn't think anything of it. Maybe my mom hadn't pulled it shut all the way, and the draft pushed it open. I went over, closed it, and went back to the couch. But then, about 20 minutes later, I heard it again. That same slow creak. I glanced over and the door was open again. This time, I got up a little slower, feeling kind of weird about it. I checked the door frame, thinking maybe it didn't latch properly, but it seemed fine. I closed it a bit harder this time, making sure it clicked shut, and even pushed the little lock button on the knob. I went back to the living room. Maybe the lock didn't work, or maybe it was just a random draft. I tried convincing myself it was nothing, but it didn't help. A few minutes later, the door creaked again. I swear, this time I didn't even want to look, but I couldn't help it. Sure enough, the basement door was wide open, swinging just slightly like it had been nudged. There wasn't any wind, no windows open, nothing. I walked over to the door and peered down into the basement. It was dark, except for a little light from one of those tiny windows near the ceiling. Everything looked normal. Just boxes, an old couch, some random junk my parents stored down there. I closed the door again, but this time I was starting to freak out. I grabbed a chair from the dining room and wedged it under the doorknob just in case. I figured that would stop whatever was happening. I went back to watching TV, trying to distract myself, but I couldn't relax. A couple hours later, my mom came home. I immediately told her what had been happening, half expecting her to laugh at me. But instead, she looked kind of serious and said, "Yeah, I've noticed that too." Apparently, over the past few days, she had found the basement door open when she was sure she'd closed it. She thought maybe it was my dad going down there and forgetting to shut it, but hearing that it happened while I was alone made her pause. That night, my dad got home, and when my mom brought it up, he looked just as confused as us. He hadn't been down there at all. Nobody had. The next day, my dad decided to check out the basement, thinking maybe there was some kind of issue with the foundation or air pressure causing the door to open. He went down, flashlight in hand, and after a while, he called my mom down to help him move some stuff. I was curious, so I followed, standing on the top step while they moved a couple of boxes. That's when they found it. In the far corner, behind some old furniture, there was a door. A small wooden door, painted over, to blend in with the wall. None of us had noticed it before, and it didn't match anything in the house. My dad managed to pry it open, and inside was this tiny crawl space. Not big enough for anyone to really fit in, just a dark, cramped hole that led under the house. I can't explain why, but the moment that door opened, I got a bad feeling, like this overwhelming sense of dread. My dad didn't seem too fazed, but my mom and I both just wanted it shut and forgotten. My dad sealed it back up, nailed it shut, and we never opened it again. After that, the basement door stayed closed. No more random creaks or openings. But every time I passed that door in the kitchen, I couldn't help but think about that hidden space underneath our house. I don't know if it was a draft, a weird foundation thing, or something else entirely, but whatever it was, I still get uneasy remembering how that door just wouldn't stay shut. Even now, I'm convinced there was something off about that basement.